May 1967, the Quang Tri battlefield entered one of the most ferocious phases of the Vietnam War. This was a key area along Route 9, regarded by the U.S. military as a steel shield, intended to block the Liberation Army's forces moving from north to south. With an extremely dense concentration of bombs and constant fighting, Quang Tri at that time was dubbed by American soldiers as a meat grinder, a place where human lives were worn away hour by hour. At Dong Ha Base, the U.S. Marine Corps Command paid special attention to an unnamed hill, absent from military maps, positioned at the western gateway of the defensive zone. Though it appeared to be a small and insignificant point, reconnaissance reports indicated unusual signs there, suspected to be a large ammunition depot of the Liberation Army, carefully concealed beneath the canopy of old-growth forest. Based on the intelligence gathered, U.S. forces assessed that the defensive strength on the hill was only at company level, posing no serious threat. With absolute confidence in their superiority in firepower, air support, and helicopter mobility, the 9th Marine Brigade believed that destroying this position would be a simple task, one that could be completed swiftly. That confidence led U.S. forces to underestimate the terrain, the people, and the fighting will of their opponent. And from this seemingly favorable context, one of the most shocking asymmetric battles on the Quang Tri battlefield began to take shape. The greatest strategic mistake made by the U.S. military in the Battle of the Unnamed Hill stemmed from a severely flawed intelligence assessment. Reconnaissance reports at the time asserted that the hill was defended by a company-sized force, with a large ammunition depot and a medium level of threat. In reality, however, the situation on the battlefield was entirely different. The defensive force consisted of only 10 Liberation Army soldiers, a small squad armed with basic personal weapons. This discrepancy not only rendered U.S. operational planning inaccurate, but also fostered a sense of complacency from the outset. Alongside intelligence failures, U.S. forces also fell victim to an absolute illusion of the power of firepower and modern technology. At the height of American military dominance, they believed that artillery, air power, and air assault tactics could crush any resistance in a short time. The scenario devised was rigid and imposed: preparatory bombardment, helicopter landings, infantry assault, and rapid withdrawal. To them, this was merely a technical thunderstrike, not a life-or-death battle. In particular, contempt for the enemy became a systemic error. U.S. forces assumed that Vietnamese troops were only capable of guerrilla warfare, lacking the ability to hold positions for long periods, or engage in direct confrontation in a conventional battle. They failed to anticipate that on the other side were soldiers ready to fight to the very end, capable of exploiting terrain, organizing resilient defenses, and turning numerical inferiority into a tactical advantage. It was this arrogance, born of faulty intelligence, blind faith in technology, and underestimation of human will, that led the U.S. military into a deadly trap they never realized they were entering. In stark contrast to the enemy's complacency, the Liberation Army entered this battle with a clear awareness of the mission's life-or-death nature. The defensive force on the unnamed hill consisted of only 10 soldiers, forming a small squad directly commanded by squad leader Bui Ngoc Du. They were neither a large elite force nor equipped with strong firepower, yet they held a position of exceptionally critical strategic importance. Hidden deep beneath the hill lay a secret ammunition depot containing approximately 3,000 artillery shells. A decisive supply source for offensive campaigns is in the Route 9 Quang Tri area. Losing this depot would mean the risk of an entire operational direction being paralyzed. Therefore, the order given to the 10 soldiers was extremely brief yet weighed 1,000 pounds. At all costs, the ammunition depot must be protected. In such circumstances, they had no choice. There were no direct reinforcements, no safe withdrawal route. Behind them was not only the ammunition depot, but also the blood and sacrifice of the people, the months-long effort of transportation and stockpiling, and the success or failure of the entire operational plan. Taking even one step back meant irreparable defeat. From this understanding, the spirit of sacrifice to complete the mission became the highest motivation for combat. Instead of preserving their force by withdrawing in the face of overwhelming U.S. firepower, Squad leader Buingok-du and his comrades chose to hold their ground proactively, turning the hill into a deadly trap. From the very moment the first blows of the pickaxe struck into the earth, the fate of the battle became inseparably bound to the iron will of 10 individuals ready to sacrifice themselves to hold that strategic foothold. If you wish, I can continue with Section 4, Unique Defensive Tactics, Reverse Slope, Underground Bunkers, Firepower Network, to complete the article seamlessly. The key factor that created the unbelievable nature of the Battle of the Unnamed Hill lay in the extremely unique defensive tactics directly organized by squad leader Buingok-du. Instead of constructing fortifications in the conventional manner on the northern slope, facing the anticipated direction of the U.S. attack, the squad chose a completely opposite approach to Western military doctrine, the reverse slope tactic. The entire trench and bunker system was built on the southern slope of the hill, an area seemingly exposed to enemy observation, but in reality an ideal blind spot for U.S. naval artillery and air power. Due to the arcing trajectories of shells, bombs fired from the sea and from the air often overshot the hilltop or landed on the forward slope, leaving the concealed rear slope largely untouched. Exploiting this physical principle demonstrated the defenders' exceptionally sharp calculations. On this terrain foundation, the 10 soldiers constructed an interconnected underground bunker system consisting of about 15 A-frame shelters with sturdy blast-resistant roofs, linked by a dense network of trenches beneath the ground. This structure allowed troops to maneuver flexibly, shift firing positions, transport ammunition, and seek shelter safely amid relentless bombardment without exposing themselves. In terms of firepower organization, the squad deployed a tripod formation, creating a closed, overlapping crossfire network. 3 combat teams were arranged in a triangular formation, controlling the stream crossing and both flanks, forcing the enemy into a position of being fired upon from multiple directions simultaneously. Notably, the command system was simplified to a primitive level. No radios, no walkie-talkies, only bamboo whistle signals and hand gestures. This crude yet effective method completely neutralized U.S. interception and electronic warfare capabilities, rendering the enemy's technological superiority meaningless. It was precisely this combination of tactical intelligence, terrain exploitation, and iron discipline that transformed a small force into an impregnable fortress amid the ferocious Quang-Tri battlefield. From the moment U.S. forces detected the area suspected of being held by Liberation Army troops, they quickly launched successive attacks, confident that absolute firepower superiority would soon crush the enemy. The opening phase consisted of intense naval artillery bombardment from offshore combined with airstrikes to clear the landing zone and flatten the defensive area. Bombs and shells rained down violently. Trees were shredded apart, creating the impression that no infantry force could possibly survive such firepower. However, contrary to U.S. calculations, the Liberation Army's interconnected underground bunker system retained most of its combat effectiveness. The soldiers patiently clung to their bunkers, maintaining absolute silence, waiting for the right moment. When U.S. infantry began to advance, believing the defenders had been destroyed, they immediately fell into a disadvantage. Only when the enemy closed in at close range did the Liberation Army open fire simultaneously. The well-organized crossfire network proved effective, inflicting heavy casualties and throwing the attacking formations into disarray. Refusing to accept a quick failure, U.S. forces continued to escalate firepower, calling in additional air support and conducting multiple precision airstrikes against positions suspected to be underground bunkers. Despite the continued devastation, the main defensive positions remained intact, thanks to the reverse slope deployment and sturdy A-frame shelters. U.S. infantry was forced to repeat multiple assaults under conditions of shaken morale, advancing cautiously while fearing sudden ambush. The battle dragged on for many hours with increasingly intense ferocity. Liberation Army forces also suffered significant losses due to relentless firepower and prolonged combat. Nevertheless, through steadfast will, strict discipline, and the determination of no retreat, the soldiers held their defensive positions and successfully protected the strategic ammunition depot. In the end, despite overwhelming technological and firepower superiority, U.S. forces failed to achieve their objective and were compelled to acknowledge that the Liberation Army's defensive strongpoint was a major obstacle far beyond initial expectations. After many hours of continuous fighting, the battle reached its most critical moment. The once solid defensive system of the Liberation Army had been severely eroded by enemy firepower. Of the original squad, only 3 soldiers remained capable of fighting, all seriously wounded. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Each man had only a few magazines left and a handful of grenades. Before them stood an enemy force many times larger. Behind them lay the strategic depot of 3,000 shells, a vital objective that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. In this dire situation, squad leader Buingakdu quickly reassessed the entire battlefield. If they continued to hold defensively, the remaining force would soon be completely worn down. Conversely, a sudden and bold action could overturn the situation. From this assessment, he made a pivotal decision. From defense to counterattack using all remaining grenades, striking directly at the enemy command area, the brain coordinating the assaults. Taking advantage of a temporary lull in enemy fire and the complacency that had emerged after hours of bombardment, Buingakdu and the 2 remaining soldiers secretly moved out of their bunker. At close range, a series of grenades was thrown in quick succession, accurately hitting the concentrated enemy command position. This surprise attack immediately caused a major shock. News that U.S. commanders had been wounded spread rapidly through the attacking formation, disrupting the command and control system that had served as the psychological and tactical backbone of U.S. forces. With on-site command lost, U.S. infantry units fell into panic. Orders became fragmented, assault axes no longer coordinated effectively. Facing the risk of further surprise attacks in unfamiliar terrain, troop morale collapsed rapidly. From a position of offensive initiative, U.S. forces were forced to shift into temporary defensive clustering and ultimately withdraw to avoid further losses. That bold counterattack became the climax and decisive turning point of the battle. From a situation with only 3 wounded soldiers and nearly depleted ammunition, the Liberation Army completely reversed the course of events, forcing a far superior force to disintegrate and retreat, holding the defensive position and preserving the strategic objective. At the end of the battle, the Liberation Army achieved a complete victory, holding the unnamed hill and preserving intact the strategic ammunition depot of 3,000 shells, the vital supply source for campaigns across the Trethian battlefield. With an initial force of only 10 soldiers, under conditions of encirclement and continuous bombardment by U.S. infantry, artillery, and air power, maintaining the defensive position was not only a military victory, but also a triumph of human will over overwhelming material strength. The battle quickly became a powerful symbol of asymmetric warfare and the resistance against the United States. On one side stood the world's most modern military, with overwhelming firepower and advanced reconnaissance technology. On the other, a small squad with limited equipment but firm control of terrain, appropriate tactics, and an unyielding fighting spirit. In reality, U.S. forces did not fail because of a lack of weapons or firepower, but because they could not break the will, determination, and motivation of their opponent. The deeper significance of the battle lies in its affirmation of a universal truth in the history of Vietnam's People's War. Strength is not measured solely by numbers or technology, but first and foremost by people and their fighting objectives. As a resolute message drawn from the smoke and fire of the battlefield, small does not mean weak, few does not mean defeat.